Welcome to the Wellness Esquire Podcast. I'm Ariella, and I can't wait for you to listen to this conversation with Will Jordan. I came across Will through his openness on LinkedIn about living with anxiety and depression, and I immediately knew I wanted to have him on the podcast. Will is a lawyer who has built a successful and varied legal career, including serving as chief of the Civil Division of the U.S. Attorney's Office, while also navigating very real mental health challenges that so many lawyers experience but feel pressure to hide. Will and I talk about what led him to law school, how his career unfolded in ways he could have never predicted, and what it's like to keep showing up in a demanding profession while managing anxiety, depression, and relentless inner self-criticism. We talk about medication, what changed when he started taking antidepressants, and how he knew they were actually helping, not just at work, but in how he was able to engage with his family and his life. We also talk about vulnerability, how hard it is, why it matters, and what it looked like for Will to go from, I shouldn't tell anyone about this, to giving CLEs and openly talking with colleagues about his mental health. Will shares what made it especially challenging to speak up in professional settings, how shame and fear showed up for him, and why he ultimately decided that saying these things out loud was worth it, and the power of recognizing that you're not alone and asking for help. This was an amazing conversation and exactly the kind of powerfully vulnerable conversation I was hoping it would be. I'm so grateful to Will for having this conversation with me, and I know you're going to find pieces of yourself in it. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy. Hello.
Hi.
It's so nice to meet you. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic.
Good.
I looked from your post that the beard might be new.
The size of the beard is new. And the topic of much discussion within our house. So I'm confronted most nights around the supper table about the when the Santa Claus beard is going away. So we'll see how long it lasts.
And what was the inspiration for it?
No inspiration, just random.
Just woke up one day and thought, I've had the same beard for too long. It's time to change things up.
Let it keep going for a while. Just see what happens,
Fantastic. Very nice. Well, yeah. I'm thrilled to connect with you.
You too.
And I actually don't remember exactly what post I saw, if it was a post of yours or a comment, but I know it was about you just being very open about your experience with anxiety and depression. And I thought, all right, let's have a conversation. Fantastic. Because these are the sorts of conversations that I want to be having on the podcast. And I have been. And I have felt that there are so many of us who know already the importance of sharing out loud the things that we have often felt that we're not supposed to say out loud. And so finding the others who already understand that and are ready to share their stories out loud is amazing. Right. And then we can do it all together. So thank you for doing that in the first place so that I could find you. Of course. And then for joining me today.
Absolutely. So Ariel, where in the world are you right now?
I am currently in Panama.
Okay.
And it's gorgeous. It's actually, this is a rainy week, an unusually rainy week, stemming from the storms on the East Coast in the US. So we are here at a time where everyone keeps saying to us, oh, you should have arrived last week. Up until exactly when you arrived, it was so sunny, it was so gorgeous. This week, it's quite rainy, little tiny spurts of sunshine, but like wild storm, but still gorgeous. So it's
that's awesome.
It's delightful.
Well, we just had about 4 or 5 inches of snow in Columbia, South Carolina, which is really rare. So the kids were out of school yesterday, and there's a snowman still in our front yard. So winter wonderland is unusual here.
Yeah. So when I was born in Boston, I grew up in Connecticut, so I know what to do with snow, but I've also been around people who did not grow up like that. And when that happens, they're like, well, we shouldn't leave the house because, we don't know how to walk in it. We don't know how to drive in it. Is that, that the world?
That's a little bit. I'm sure that up north schools would not have been closed yesterday. But it was, a lot of times we get the ice, which is really tough to drive on, but this was more like a true powdery snowstorm. So it wasn't too bad getting around, but it was fun.
How do your kids like it?
One of our, let's see, our 13-year-old won't go outside when it's below about 50. So she was just bundled up by the fire. So
I'm
the
that child.
yeah, the others, we got out and did a little sledding one day. So it was fun.
Well, a big part of the reason that we now beach hop is because we're from the East Coast and we understand now that we have a choice about whether
Yeah.
we want to endure cold and snow or
Yeah.
not. And the answer is we don't want to. So, so I want to start at a version of the beginning. Tell me about what drew you to law school in the first place and what you thought you were going to do.
Yeah, so when I was in college, I went to Davidson College, which is a small school outside of Charlotte. Steph Curry went there. He's the second most famous person from Davidson. I'm the first, obviously, but I went there, and I was a sociology major, and I got into that just because I took a course and liked it, and really thought at that point that I wanted to do something with criminal justice, and so I was thinking like FBI or something along those lines. And so really when I went into law school, I was thinking I want to do probably some sort of criminal law, but I really didn't know. And went into law school and just kind of came down a different path. And I think part of it was I realized at some point that I can get my fix of criminal law through like episodes of Dateline and stuff like that, and probably don't need to spend my life dealing with the difficult stuff that you have to deal with in that world. So, but yeah, when I started law school, I was like, I want to do criminal prosecution, or I want to go into the FBI, and I think in hindsight, you learn things about yourself as you grow older. I think I would have been a terrible FBI agent because I don't know that like anxiety is a great attribute of people that are out there, fighting crime in that way and all of that. But so it's still an interest of mine, but I'm glad that I didn't go down that career path.
So how did your path get you to the work that you do now?
So I went to South Carolina for law school, and the typical sort of got into law school, started taking everything that I had to take, really didn't know what I wanted to do. Had some summer associate positions at law firms kind of around the Southeast, and really just kind of got into that sort of by choice, sort of by it's just the way the river took me. You get into law school and opportunities come along and you end up in a job and you take one that you get and you're not sure if you're going to love it or not. And, part of my story that I share with people is when I got out of law school, we moved up to Greenville, South Carolina, which is a couple of hours northwest of here. And I was working at a larger size law firm for South Carolina. And I was doing a lot of construction litigation. And I really didn't like it. And, part of it was kind of the subject matter. I was trying to figure out how to do this law thing. And I also didn't understand the construction side of things. And so it was just these two worlds that were like converging in a way that was really confusing. And it just wasn't super interesting. And that's also when I sort of started recognizing that I was dealing with some anxiety and some depression. And it took me a while to sort of get there and recognize that it was more than just, this is a difficult profession and it can be a stressful one. And, I got into this sort of pattern of everything was just super anxiety inducing for me. Every event in the course of a lawsuit was just, I was playing out the worst case scenario. If I had what we would consider a relatively, minor hearing that I was going to go handle, before I went into the courtroom, I had already lost and been sanctioned and been disbarred in my mind because I was just like, I've forgotten to do something or I did something wrong. And it was just, it was really disappointing because it was, I had done well in law school. I had gotten a job that I was excited about. And, I was married at the time, and we were about to have a new baby. And I was like, this career is just crushing me already. And it was bleeding over into sort of my home life and how I was feeling at home on nights and on the weekends. And I was like, man, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have gone down this path at all. Because it was just so stressful and so difficult to sort of enjoy the practice of law at that point. I tell folks, cut me off anytime that I'm telling too many stories, but I tell folks that I give this talk that I've given a lot over the years that is sort of my story of anxiety and depression. And I tell folks that I'm a lawyer, but that I was never supposed to be a lawyer. And I know that because when I was in my third year of law school, I had one of those clinical courses where you get to kind of practice law alongside a professor. And I had this like juvenile criminal case that we were handling. And I had a friend of mine that was my partner for the case. And we went to court for this sort of minor hearing. These things are handled in family court in South Carolina. This sort of minor preliminary hearing for this case. And we go in and everything's fine. And we walk out of the courthouse and we're standing there talking to the client, kind of telling him what's just happened and talking to his mom about what's coming up next. And literally while I'm standing there talking to him, a bird poops on my head. And the client looks at me and he's like a 13-year-old kid. And he's like, Mr. Will, I think a bird just pooped on your head. And it 100% had. And so I tell people like that should have been my sign that like the second I stepped into a courtroom that this wasn't what I was supposed to do with my life. But I marched on. So I got to this point where I was like, I mean, maybe that bird outside the courthouse was right. Like, I don't know that I should even be doing this. And in a lot of ways I felt sort of overwhelmed by the profession and sort of trapped in it because this was my first real job out of college and law school. Financially I was doing fine, and it's not easy to pivot and just be like, I'm going to start all over and go do something completely different. And so, that was kind of it was a hard first few years of practice for me.
So you seem to have figured out something to do with that, because you did end up as the chief of the civil division of the AUSA's office. So it's not like you actually did end up in a dumpster. So walk me through how you're thinking, now maybe I should have listened to the bird poop on my head and stopped. Yeah. And then, went on to a role like that. And now it seems like you do quite a bit of mediation and employment litigation. So you stayed in law.
Yes, I did.
You found either make it work or with challenges.
Yes, that's right. This podcast is brought to you by Zoloft. No.
Not yet.
Just trying to get a plug for you there. I'm going to hold it up for you.
Please, I'll take the sponsorships.
No, yeah. So, it was a combination of things. I think as I look back growing up, there were issues with anxiety and probably even with depression that I just didn't recognize. And so I think a big part of it is coming to recognize that there was something there going on. And, just having that knowledge helps you sort of deal with it and understand, this is a struggle that I'm going to have, and I've got to figure out a way to address it. And so I practiced in Greenville for about 3 years. And, I wasn't happy in my job. I didn't really know what to do because I'd spent all this time and this money getting this law degree, and I felt like the legal profession was just sort of crushing me. And ultimately decided we moved back to Columbia, and I took a job at a firm that I had worked at during law school for over the summers and then during one of the years. And I really just felt like, all right, I need a fresh start. I need to just sort of do something other than construction litigation. I need to sort of give this another try and a fresh start. And it was a great firm. I only have good things to say about the folks that I was practicing with there. I loved all of them. And I was doing mostly legal malpractice defense work, which was better suited to my interest and my better so than construction litigation. But it didn't take too long after getting started at a new firm where I just sort of was in this same boat where I just felt like as my cases started moving along, like it was so anxiety inducing, it was so stressful. And I was like, I'm going down this same path. And, it was kind of bleeding over into home life again. We had 2 little kids at the time. And I would come home on the weekends and at night, and I would just sort of feel like numb to the world and not want to engage with the kids, not want to engage with my wife. And it sort of came to a head one weekend. I was at home and I was kind of talking to my wife about how I was feeling, what was going on. And I just sort of said to her, and it wasn't anything that I thought about, but it just sort of came out like, I think you and the kids would be better off without me. And like, as soon as I said that, I was like, that's not a normal way of thinking about yourself or about your life. And it sort of hit me, okay, there's something more going on here than just, this is a stressful job. Life can bring challenges. And on the heels of that, I reached out to a friend who had shared with me that he had struggled with depression. And I met with him and I sort of said, here's how I'm feeling. I don't really know what to do about it. And he said, well, why don't you go just see your doctor about it? And I was like, oh, a medical approach to a medical problem. That's novel. And so I did, and, sort of went down the path, and that doctor sort of explained some of the kind of chemistry and all of that that could be going on in the brain, and prescribed me some Lexapro at that point. And I was super reluctant to start taking an antidepressant because I was like, I don't know that I want to take this medication for the rest of my life. And you hear about all these side effects, and I just don't know. And my friend said, well, you don't want to feel the way that you've been feeling right now for the rest of your life. So give it a try. And so I did. I started on medication. I went to see a counselor. I've seen sort of a variety of counselors over the years, some that I've meshed well with, some that I haven't meshed so well with. And, it hasn't been a consistent thing, but something that I've kind of gone back to from time to time. And I really think that getting on medication, getting into some counseling, sort of understanding that this is something that is true about myself was a huge step in just being able to deal with it. I mean, if you don't know what's going on and you're just like, I feel stuck in this rut, you don't know what to do about it. And so I stayed at that law firm for a number of years. I had always sort of wanted or been interested in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I had a colleague that went over there, and a year or so later, she hired me to come on over there. And I think a big part of it for me was it was kind of a nice change of pace for a while. I was in the civil division, so I was doing similar work that I had been doing in private practice, but it's just a different feel. It's all mostly in federal court. Your clients are federal agencies, and so you don't have that sort of same level of pressure that sometimes you have with private clients. And after a couple of years, I moved into management there and was sort of overseeing the caseload and helping folks with briefs and trials and all of that. And so it was a nice change of pace for me because it wasn't the grind of litigation that I had been doing. And so it was a great 6 or so years. And, when I went over there, I didn't think that I would stay forever. But it came to a point where, some leadership and stuff was changing, and it was a good time for me to be looking elsewhere. And so I've now joined a really good friend of mine at a firm here in Columbia. I'm not going to say that I always love the practice of law, because that would just be a pretty bold-faced lie. But I do feel like I've gotten to a point where I know enough about myself and I know about enough about the practice where, I can recognize when there are things that are going to be not fun to deal with and stressful for me, and sort of how how to cope with those as best I can.
What did you notice first about yourself when you did start taking antidepressants?
Um, I think part of the fear of do I want to take these at all is, are they going to just drastically change my personality? Are they going to make me some altered version of myself? And are they going to make me like artificially happy or like fake feeling? Or I always think about that movie, Office Space, where the main character like goes into a hypnotist and he gets hypnotized, and while the hypnotist has him under hypnosis, the hypnotist dies, and so the main character is just left in this perpetual state of hypnosis. And so he doesn't care about anything. He's going into his job with flip flops on, and he's cleaning fish at his desk, and he doesn't care about anything. And I was like, is it going to make me that version of like, just like Will's just always got this weird smile on his face or something? And it didn't do that at all. It takes some time to sort of work into your system, but over a few weeks or a month or so, I really felt like it just sort of made me feel more like myself than I had in a long time. It just sort of, brought me back to a baseline that I feel like I hadn't felt in a while. And, I'm sure I had hopes that it would be this magic bullet that would just cure everything and I'd never have to think about it again. And it certainly hasn't done that. But I do feel like it, stressful things are still stressful. Sad things are still sad. Life is still hard at times. It doesn't cure all, but it, at least for me, it has sort of just brought me back into a sort of more baseline, makes me feel more like myself, than I had in a while.
Were there things that you noticed in particular, either with how you were able to engage with your family or with work, that helped you understand, oh, I think this is doing something. I think this might have been a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of it for me was gradual. Like it wasn't like I took the pill and then one day I was like, oh wow, I feel great. But I do feel like that I would, before I started taking the medication, I would go out into the world and I could put on the mask, right? So like I could go to my job and do what I needed to do. I could interact with people in the work setting or with my friends. And at least I think no one would notice that I was dealing with anything. And so part of my struggle was like, I go out into the world and everybody out there is getting the best version of me. And then you come home and the mask comes off, and because you can't keep it on forever. and like your family is getting the worst version of you, and that's not how it should be. And so I did feel like once I started on the medication that I felt like, okay, this is bringing me back to sort of a normal level. And when I get home at night, I don't feel just completely crushed by everything that's happened in the day to where I need to just go veg out and not engage. We have 4 kids. It's still a struggle at times. There's a lot of energy and a lot of, we've got teenagers all the way down to elementary age kids. And so there's a lot of different challenges that we face on any given day. And the odds are that one in 4 is going to have some issue most nights that we have to address. But, again, it's not a cure all. It didn't fix the problem, but it certainly was a big step in helping me deal with it.
Were you pretty open about what you were experiencing, and these, were you officially diagnosed also with anxiety around with the depression?
Yeah. So when I went to I've been to a couple of different doctors about it. I think my initial diagnosis was depression. I don't know that I've ever officially been diagnosed with anxiety as well.
But you are aware, you feel like you have those. When I asked, about, officially being diagnosed, I don't actually mean that as the only way to know that you have it is to have.
No, I know. Yeah.
What I meant more was, when you understood that you had these challenges, how comfortable were you at the outset with telling people in your life, whether you're, personal, professional, both, that, hey, I now realize that I've got these things going on with me? Or did you, have embarrassment or shame around it or anything like that?
Yeah, initially, I think I didn't feel comfortable at all. And I think it's one of these things that, as lawyers, especially in private practice, like there's this sort of image is everything mentality of like, I want everybody who is a prospective client or a judge or a mediator or a senior partner in my law firm to think that I have it all together, that I'm the most competent, the most knowledgeable, like the best there is. And that, in a lot of ways, is not compatible with telling them that I struggle with mental illness. And so I think initially, especially like in the work setting, it was something that I did not feel comfortable really talking about. More so with friends and family and stuff, I felt more comfortable with it. And I think a lot of what sort of helped me come to this place where I'm more comfortable sharing about it and don't feel embarrassed or ashamed or was when I would talk about it, almost universally, someone else would say, I deal with the exact same thing. And so you sort of start down this like, okay, I was living in my head and I was thinking that I'm the only person in the world, or at least in the legal profession, that's dealing with this. And like, that's obviously not the case. And so I didn't feel super comfortable initially, but over time, I'm like, you know what? It's not this like scarlet letter that I'm wearing. It's not anything that means that I can't be a good lawyer or a successful lawyer. And we've all been in the CLEs where the lawyer gets up and says 87% of lawyers suffer from anxiety and depression. And so I think over time it just became more, easier for me to talk about. Still isn't always easy, but
It's a hard topic, just period, the end. And I can imagine for some people that the talking about it may never go away, or the challenge of talking about it may never go away. But just because something is feels hard doesn't mean we don't do it.
right. Yeah.
And in some cases, it might actually be the reason to do it. So
Right.
when you did start talking about it professionally, how did you start? How did you decide, okay, I'm gonna try it out today and see how it goes? And now you do CLEs and here you are on a podcast talking about it. So how did you go from probably shouldn't tell anybody to I'm just gonna tell anybody who will listen?
Wait, is this podcast like going out? This is just us, right?
Did I forget to mention? This was just practice. I was just seeing like, should I do this thing?
No, so it's interesting. A good friend of mine, so we practiced law together at a law firm. I mentioned that she left and she went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and she was the chief of the civil division there before I started. And about a year after she left the law firm, she hired me to come to the civil division and work with her. And at some point when we were working together, I had a really bad day, and she was my boss. And, I wasn't in the hospital or anything, but, I just had a day where, and it might've even been during those weird COVID years where a lot of us were working from home. And I reached out to her, I think after that day, and I told her, I need to take leave for yesterday because I did not have a good day. I wasn't feeling well. And I sort of shared with her that I struggled with depression and anxiety. I just had one of those days where like I was struggling to get anything done. I was at home by myself, I think, and just like sort of in a funk. And I was like, I just, let me take a sick day yesterday. And of course she said that was fine. And then a little while later, she said, we're trying to put on a CLE for the office. Would you be willing to share about the mental health side of things. And South Carolina has this requirement. I think it's every 2 years you have to have 1 hour of mental health, substance abuse, CLE credit. And so it's helped me in my quest to do CLEs, that people need one every 2 years, and they're always kind of looking for that mental health hour. And so she asked me if I would do that. And I think I said yes before I really thought about it. She was my boss, sure. And so that sort of started me down the path. And as I was thinking about what I wanted to do with it, and I don't mean this to be critical of others, but so many of those CLEs are just sort of statistics, and they're easy to sort of ignore. And so I was like, I don't want to get up there and spend 15 minutes telling you about how many lawyers suffer from depression. And so I said, I'm just going to create a CLE that is just like my story. And I really thought that what would be most helpful is really just for folks to see someone within the bar who says, I struggle with this. It's okay. And, remove as much as possible the sort of stigma behind it, take it from behind the curtain, let people see it, know that it's okay to talk about. And I was like, well, that'll take me about 30 seconds and I have to fill up an hour. And so, I really just sort of created this. I mean, it's an hour long, and I've changed it up some, but it's an hour long CLE. I don't use any PowerPoints or anything. I just talk for an hour. And it's really just sort of my story of recognizing it in myself, what I've done to try to help to cope with it. I just tell a bunch of stories that I tell the bird story, the bird outside the courthouse. And so it's a combination of sort of putting it out in the open. It's one of my favorite CLEs because I don't have to say anything about any statute or case or anything related to the practice of law really at all. It takes no research. And as I started doing it, people would come up and say, I feel the exact same way. I've struggled with this in the same way. And just encouragement from others and hearing it and saying, thank you for sharing that. And it just sort of, I've probably done it 50 or 60 times now over the last couple of years. So it's been good. It's fun for me. People act like they enjoy it. So
it's incredibly courageous that your first real experience telling colleagues and doing a CLE about your own personal mental health struggle was your office.
Yeah. Maybe I felt compelled to do it because my boss asked me to.
Perhaps. And fantastic.
Yeah. I don't know. There's something interesting about it. I've tried to sort of put my finger on this. It doesn't bother me to get up in front of a group of people and tell this story. And one of the first times I did it, they're up in the upstate of South Carolina. They have this yearly bar CLE that everybody, 400 people go to it, and they get a bunch of CLE credits. I think it's free for members of that area of the bar. And that was one of the first times that I did this. And it doesn't bother me to get up and share it with a big group of people. And I think a big part of it is that I'm controlling the narrative. And so I can get up and I can say exactly what I want to say. It's harder for me, not in this setting as much, but it's harder for me when somebody comes up to me on an individual level and is like, let's dig into what you're talking about here, or tell me more about this and that. So, a part of it is it's part CLE, part stand-up comedy routine, not to pat myself on the back, but it's just, I can just make it funny. I can make it engaging, and then I can walk out of there after it's over, and not really have to engage a lot on the sort of like, well, tell me about this and what. So I don't know. I think that's why it's been kind of easier for me. I can almost kind of distance myself from it, and I'm just giving this presentation and then I walk out.
Interesting. Is there, you mentioned that when it actually feels more vulnerable and maybe more scary for you is when you have less control over the conversation because it's more personal and maybe one-on-one, maybe a podcast. And by the way, if I do ask you something and you don't want to answer, you tell me, and we either keep it in where you say, I don't want to answer, or you tell me and we take it out.
Yeah.
Is there something that you're aware of that you're still wrapping your head around for yourself and that you do feel afraid to say out loud, even afraid to tell yourself the sort of thing that when someone asks you, you're like, no, don't want to go there?
That's a good question. I don't really think so. I mean, I think that I'm always sort of introspective about things and kind of always sort of thinking through other things that might be going on. I mean, I started counseling, and I think I can remember counseling most clearly during COVID, because I went to see a counselor in person, and then I only saw her in person one time, and the rest of the sessions were online. And counseling is really uncomfortable for me. And I think it probably is supposed to be, and I think it is for most people. But the counselor is asking you to articulate things that you're like, I don't exactly know how to explain that. It's just a very, and I'm not trying to hide anything or, but I really don't know how to sort of answer that digging question. And so, I don't feel like there's anything that I'm like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. I think there are times where, I am fortunate in my struggle that it has never come to a point of like suicidal ideation or, hospitalization or anything that severe. I do think that if there's anything that I'm sort of like, it's this sort of like element of self-talk. And I wouldn't want to tell people the things that I think about myself at sometimes. Like I think that's where the sort of digging can get difficult.
Is that you mean that like the negative self-talk of,
Yeah.
That's also, I mean, a lot of the conversations that I have with people, I have to imagine are very similar to what we're talking about now, and the sorts of things that you feel, oh God, I can't tell someone that that's the kind of thing that I think about myself. And actually, one of the things that led me on my own journey that has now led to the Wellness Esquire, but a smaller component, was I had about a year where I don't do New Year's resolutions. I'll usually focus on a word or a theme. And I had a theme one year around self-compassion, because my husband pointed out that I was the most empathetic, compassionate person to everyone in the world and so mean to myself. I mean, I just had every way of, just being mean to myself. And, I have very high expectations for me and for others. And I'll certainly be a lot easier on others if they ever fall short, and I would just beat myself up. And I've now made so much progress around that I actually can't think right now of an example of exactly what I used to say to myself, but it was not kind.
Yeah.
But it's, I've worked really hard on, not saying oh God, you're such an idiot. And all of those kinds of things in every variation you can imagine. And I think so many of us have that general experience and then our own unique language that we've used, that's really hard to to process and then to do anything about, especially when it's so hard to say out loud and tell someone else. And one of the probably most important ways that I learned to be a lot nicer to myself, which I still struggle with, but I'm much, much better, is I would say all those things out loud, which is why my husband, said that to me initially. And then he would say, don't talk to my wife that way. And so now with all sorts of people, whether they're expecting it or not, the kind of relationship that we have, when I hear someone I'm talking to say something that's just not it, even if it's just, one example that comes up all the time, not exactly the self-talk, but just the constant apologizing for things that you don't have to apologize for.
Right.
And I'll just say, you don't have to apologize for that. And so all these ways that we can support each other and recognize, ooh, it seems like you might have you might be struggling with this. So I'm going to just name it for you and be an accountability partner, if you will, and just say, hey, I notice you're not being so nice to yourself right now.
Yeah.
What can we do differently about that?
Yeah. I think for me, it's like, and I share this when I talk with folks about it, like, there are so many days where I think a lot of us, we wake up in the morning and before our feet have even hit the floor, we have said negative things to ourselves about ourselves. And it's not always drastic, but you wake up and you think, oh, I should have gotten up earlier. I should have done X, Y, and Z yesterday so that I don't feel so behind today. I should have gotten up and gone for a run this morning. I'm so lazy. What am I doing? And when you do that, you're starting the day already just on a negative foot. You're already, we say things in our minds. And I tell people, like, if I woke up tomorrow morning and I rolled over and I said to my wife, you should have gotten up and gone for a run today, she would murder me in our bed, and rightfully so. But like, we say those things to ourselves and don't catch it as like, well, that's not very kind, or that's not very helpful. And so I struggle with giving myself grace, and even in ways where it's not anything that anyone around me would even know that I need grace for. It's like, I didn't do enough work today, and that thought that's like persistent in my mind just weighs on me all day, and I don't usually verbalize it. I don't, but it's this sort of just like, ooh, I'm attacking myself, and nobody else even knows it's going on, but it certainly is impacting how I'm feeling and my self-worth.
The connection, the negative self-talk and the way it impacts our self-worth it's huge. And the way we think about ourselves impacts the way we show up every day. And I had a part of the conversation I had for another episode with Emily Logan Stedman. You made me think of it because you said grace. It's hard for you to have grace for yourself. She has a podcast. She's a lawyer, and she has a podcast called The Grace. Oh, now I've lost track. The Grace episode, the Grace podcast, must be the Grace podcast. And she talks about learning to give herself the grace that she gives to others, and learning to, understand that self-talk and relabel and understand that the things that you're saying to yourself, not necessarily true.
Right.
And you can change the way you communicate with yourself. It's hard. It can be done.
Yeah. And I think a big piece for me, especially through counseling, was, this is going to probably sound stupid, but like a big part of it for me going through counseling was like even recognizing that matters. Like recognizing that the thoughts in your own head really impact how you feel. And, it's like, wait, you're saying that if I change sort of how I'm talking to myself, I can change how I'm feeling? Yes. But I think before then it was like, no, it's just a thought. It's not impacting my well-being or my life. It's just a fleeting thought, that.
Yeah. Well, and I hope you don't mind, I'll point out that you prefaced that with, this might sound stupid. and which is a thing we all do. And I also practice not prefacing the things that I say that, might sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, or I should have known that before, or whatever it may be.
Take that part out. I'm just kidding.
You
I'm
know,
kidding.
I know you're kidding, and I love that we've ended up on this path because the reason that this podcast has actually ended up in the world and is not just sitting, in Riverside and in the various clouds, is because I finally made the very wise decision of hiring a friend to take the conversations and do all the magic that makes it end up in the world. Part of that was my own bandwidth and limitations, and part of it was one of the ways that I struggle with my own perfectionism is, it's about the way I communicate. And I'm constantly working on my communication skills. I love to talk. I can ramble. I can go on all sorts of tangents. I can get lost in my thoughts. And I can just be an imperfect speaker. And so one of my fears with the podcast was, what if I don't sound like a perfect communicator? And so I'm not doing the podcast to sound like a perfect communicator. I'm doing it to shine a light on all of the ways that we are human beings and have our challenges and struggles and what that looks like in all the variations. And so I very intentionally, when we keep the imperfections in, especially mine, it's very much on purpose. And part of the way I got to that was when I really benefit listening to podcasts and recognizing, oh, that host is actually not an amazing communicator, but it's a really successful, impactful podcast that people love to listen to. But if you listen to their communication style and their interview approach, there's a spectrum. And so this is my way of showing, hey, I'm not always great at this myself, but we need these conversations. And here, watch me also learn.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And so I've listened to a few of the episodes. I haven't gotten through all of them, but I really do. I'm not just saying this. I really do like it. I don't listen to a lot of this type of podcast, like I listen to comedy podcasts and I like true crime podcasts and stuff like that. But I really do, I think it's sort of evolved over the years there, back when like the Serial podcast came out, have you ever listened to that?
No.
It's like this, it was probably like 15 years ago, but no, not Serial, like Serial.
That's the
but
name
it like,
okay.
Yeah, it follows this like, it was super famous, Ariella. You're acting like I don't know what I'm talking about.
No. You'd be amazed at how little I know about like pop culture related things and what's out there in the world. As much as I post on social media, I'm not on there. So I'm living under various rocks. So tell me what I missed.
Well, so there was this podcast, and the first season of it followed this like there's probably 15 episodes in the season, and it follows this murder story and investigation, and like it was in a high school kid was convicted of murdering a friend or something, and anyway, it goes through this sort of like the investigation and the prosecution, and it's sort of like, did he really do it or not? It's this but like if you listen to that podcast, it is so produced, like there's music in between, and you can tell that it's like edited to be like a picture of perfection. And I feel like nowadays, a lot, like one of the podcasts that I listen to the most is a bunch of comedians that just sit around and talk for an hour or two and about whatever, and are just funny, and and it's sort of like, I think that it feels so much more real. It feels like you're sitting in the room sort of cutting up with them and not just listening to this like professional production. And so I think it's great. I mean, I think leave all the ums and uhs and that was stupids and everything else in there. So it's just a conversation. So
speaking of mistakes and imperfections, I'd love to talk about your work with legal malpractice defense and the connection with ethics and mental health.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, when I tell people that I did a lot of legal malpractice defense, and I don't do it a lot now, I do enjoy it still, but I haven't, coming back from the U.S. Attorney's Office, I haven't really gotten into it again. But when I tell people that I do that, it can be a practice area that is anxiety inducing for lawyers, right? So like if I'm worried about how I practice law and I'm worried that I'm going to make mistakes, then like representing lawyers who are alleged to have made mistakes can be sort of an anxiety inducing thing. I think for me, it was always interesting. And, it's one of those areas where you get cases where somebody made a mistake, and everybody makes mistakes from time to time, and they missed a deadline, or, something happened. And then the question is, did that really impact the client? Were they really damaged by that or not? You get cases where you're like, I don't think anybody did make a mistake at all. And so I think we defend everything that happened. There certainly is a component of, and I have had some cases where an attorney was dealing with either a substance abuse issue or something else, that I think contributed to sort of what they ended up facing. And so I think a large part of it is I really like representing lawyers. I really like trying to help lawyers who are struggling, whether it's with a malpractice suit, whether it's with their mental health struggles, whether it's a difficult case that I can try to help them resolve through mediation. I really do enjoy working with lawyers and helping lawyers in their practice, because I know that it's a difficult profession, and a lot of professions are difficult, but I think helping lawyers sort of work through those issues has been a real highlight of my career.
One of the things that I think about on this topic of, lawyers making mistakes and mental health and, the potential consequences and repercussions is there have been occasions that I've been aware of and sometimes been brought in to try to help resolve, where a lawyer made a mistake, and by the time it's discovered, you then find out that the lawyer was struggling with mental health challenges and may now be, then went out on mental health leave, or, got some help, or whatever the case may be. And I wonder a lot of the time, I wonder about this too when it comes to, a lot of the cases that we're seeing now with lawyers overusing, if you will, ChatGPT and not understanding their limitations, and that it's a tool, when I see those cases, I end up, I don't know the people involved, I don't know all the details, but I end up wondering, is this an indication of burnout? Because these are, you don't go through law school and start a career. And a lot of these people who have ended up in these situations, they're not new. Some of them are, I'm sure, but some of them, they're partners. They've been practicing for a long time. To me, it's likely not laziness. It's probably a mix of not understanding the tools and a lot of, I'm struggling in one way or another and looking for something to help. And then, sometimes you try something to help you out and, it backfires. But often it starts with, I'm not okay. And then you realize how not okay you must have been because something was really wrong.
Yeah. And I think, combined with that is this sort of reluctance of people to share when they are struggling with something. I remember, there's been a lot of discussion within our bar, I know, about sort of character and fitness applications and disclosing mental health struggles and alcohol abuse and all kinds of things like that. And, when I applied to the U.S. Attorney's Office, I think it had a question on there about, have you ever been diagnosed with a mental health condition? And so you sort of start this career where you're asked questions about that, and you're like, okay, apparently you don't want that in the profession. And so you get into the profession and you find yourself facing something like that. And you're like, I know that there's this lawyers helping lawyers, which is what our South Carolina bar has. I know there's this confidential anonymous line that I can call and get help, but like, I don't know how confidential it really is. And I don't know how anonymous it really is. And so that I think that part of it is like, I don't want to tell people about it. I don't think it's good for my career. I don't think it's good for others in the profession to know about it. And so I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to reach out to someone and say, I really need some help here. And then, you find yourself in a position where you are completely burned out, or you are so overwhelmed that you're stuck. I mean, a lot of us, I think it's part of my struggle is when I find myself in those times of depression or anxiety, like I can have pretty severe decision paralysis. And so like it feels like everything is like a mountain to climb, and it's like, all right. And that can lead you to missing deadlines. That can lead you to doing something wrong, to not taking care in the decisions you're making. And so I think it all comes back to this sort of like, do I feel comfortable letting people know when I'm struggling and getting some help for it? Or am I just going to soldier on and risk making a mistake that ends up in a legal malpractice lawsuit? And, that's part of why I'm like, let's talk about it. Let's make it not this elephant in the room that we're not talking about.
What have you felt the impact has been on your career, if at all? Starting with that first CLE, when you talked about your mental health struggles with your colleagues up until now.
I've been unemployed for the last 10 years. I can't get it. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, it's, I think it's been positive. Now, I wouldn't say, and I think this is true for anything, if you give a presentation on any topic, if you share anything about yourself, there is going to be someone that is like, has some negative comment or negative reaction. I do think that there are some people, and not to generalize, but I probably in the older generation that are of the mind, he shouldn't be saying things like this. He shouldn't be talking openly about this struggle. And I have had a few folks come up to me after presentations. I was actually in Boston, and I gave the CLE, I think it was like an elder law conference, and I did the presentation, and this guy came up to me afterwards, and he was like, you should have a question and answer session after that talk. And I was like, I've never thought of that, but I probably will never do that, but thanks for the idea. And he was like, because I have a lot of problems with what you said. And I was like, oh boy. And he proceeded to tell me that, like, somebody who deals with what I deal with shouldn't be a lawyer, shouldn't have 4 kids, like basically telling me that my entire life trajectory was the wrong one for myself. And I'm like, why do you think that's helpful? Or like, what are you expecting out of this interaction? But, so I think there are always going to be some people that when I get up and say I deal with depression, or when I get up and tell stories that involve animals pooping on my head, like, are going to be like, what is this guy doing? But it's so overwhelming that I get positive feedback that I'm like, I don't really care. I mean, it really doesn't bother me. And I'm not just saying that. Like, I get so many comments that are like, that was the best CLE that I've heard on mental health, that, you didn't just get up there and lecture us about things. And, that I'm like, yeah, so it's working. And so I can ignore the sort of, it's almost just to the point where it's funny when somebody comes up and is like, I disagree with everything you said.
Is there anything from those CLEs that you give that we haven't covered today that you'd love to share?
That's a good question. I think part of it for me is that when I sort of recognize this about myself, and this is sort of probably stereotypical man approach to things, but I was like, okay, I've figured out this problem. There's got to be a solution. And so, like, okay, I have depression, I have anxiety. What's the solution? And I talk in the CLE about sort of looking for that magic bullet that was just going to, like, that make everything better. I had a friend back then that sent me this article that said that cold showers are um, known to alleviate the symptoms of depression. And I took a cold shower one day, and I can tell you that there's nothing more depressing than starting your day with a cold shower. Uh, if you're a cold shower aficionado, don't be offended. But I was like, there's got to be some like exercise or diet or lifestyle change that I can make that's just gonna like make this all go away. Um, and I think I've just learned over the years that like there unfortunately isn't a magic bullet, and um, medication helps me. Sort of being mindful of how I'm talking to myself, trying to take care of myself physically helps me. But like, there's not one thing out there that's like, here is the cure for this problem that you're facing. Um, it took me a long time to sort of just accept that reality. But, I think it's important to know there are things out there that can help you if you're struggling and you're, um, you know, go see a counselor or talk to your doctor about medication. It's not right for everyone, but it's right for some people. But there's not this just like magic bullet, unfortunately. If you know of it,
Well,
though, please let me know.
one of the reasons that I'm having these conversations and in this way is because there's no one solution for anything, and we're all different people, and there's a lot of different approaches to take for the same or similar kinds of challenges and experiences. And I have a toolbox for my challenges, and my hope is that by listening to lots of these episodes, people will be able to pull little bits from each one and say, "Ooh, that piece works for me now, this piece works for me now," and then over time adjust with more information. And we're all different. We need different things, and we need different things at different times. And the more stories we hear, the more aware
Right.
we become of how not alone we are, and how many different things there
Yeah.
are to try to get us from where we don't want to be to where we do want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
Thank you so much for having this conversation. This was amazing.
No, thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Good. That's the goal. All right.
And I don't think I have to email you with anything to delete. I think I'm okay.
Perfect. Fantastic. Thanks for listening. I hope you got a ton of value from this conversation, and that you will check out the links in the description to learn more about the guest and the Wellness Esquire. And I hope you take even just 1 minute to do something for yourself today. Maybe right now, drink more water, say no, call a friend, do something that makes you happy, have a 30-second dance party, find something to make you laugh. Also, be sure to subscribe and send the podcast to a colleague. And if we're not yet connected on LinkedIn, please fix that. I'd love to know you. See you next time.